Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Andrew today. Andrew's a member of the Patreon community, and he's reaching out to share some interesting experiences that have happened up there in northern Wisconsin, but also some experiences that he was part of on the Omaha Reservation out there north of Omaha, Nebraska. So welcome to the show today, Andrew.
Thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate it. Really excited to talk to you tonight.
Absolutely. I remember having part of this conversation with you in I think it was a Patreon special meeting. Yeah, it was the end of the month thing we do. And I remember you sharing all about the northern Wisconsin stuff. And I was like, man, I wish this was recorded right now. So I'm glad that, we have you back in a kind of a different setting in order to get things documented about what happened up there in northern Wisconsin. So is there anything that the listeners would need to know about you context-wise before we get into things, Andrew?
No, I don't think so. I think my context comes in my family history and in the history of the area in which my family owns a vacation cabin, a tiny little cabin on Callahan and Mud Lakes in Sawyer County. And of course, through time, my interest in the subject has taken me elsewhere in Sawyer County, Wisconsin, and is with me at home now in Omaha, Nebraska. And definitely wanted to share an experience that I had, like you mentioned, on the Omaha Reservation, working with Rez Squatching Research. Shout out to Barry Webster. I will get into my conversations briefly that I've had with Barry as it pertains to my experience as well.
Perfect. Well, Andrew, let's go ahead and let's not wait any longer. I'm going to have you go ahead and take us up to northern Wisconsin, and feel free to start where you would like to.
Great, thank you. So my immediate experience and history with Bigfoot starts on Callahan and Mud Lakes in Sawyer County, Wisconsin. And the first settler on Callahan Lake was a famous logger, Bill Strassis. He built his first home on the lake in 1914. And at that time, people would have to fish Callahan and Mud Lakes separately because there was so much vegetation and muck just separating them. So in 1937, they created a system of spillways and dams that flooded the area in order to combine Callahan and Mud Lakes, which created kind of a flowage from the I believe northwest Tiger Cat flowage goes into Mud, goes into Callahan. Callahan, this dam, one of the dams that they built, drains into what is the North Chief River. So my father's mother, so my grandma, my dad's side, her father built one of the first resorts on Callahan Lake. It was called North Home Resort. And then he built a few cabins to the south with the help of his children, which would be my grandmother, my great uncle, and they built it all by hand. They were children at the time. So my grandmother would tell us stories about putting up the logs, and she was the one who was inside, chinking on the inside and applying the lacquer and things like that. And a majority of the original structure remains intact today. It's a tiny little shack that is now amidst, a number of more modern homes and large vacation cabins. And it's a beautiful area, lots of great fishing, lots of wildlife. But that's kind of my family's initial history into it. Now, my great-grandfather the story is he lost the land in a poker game, and he also ended up passing away nearby. I'm not aware of, a real conclusive cause of death or anything, but that happened right near the property. And in the 1970s, my grandfather, so my grandmother who built the cabin, her husband, was able to purchase 2 plots of land that her father had originally settled, if you will. So this is the 2 plots of land. One is on the west side, which is Callahan Lakefront property, and the other plot of land is across the street, which leads down to the dam, where the dam spills out, and the North Chief River. So if anyone's in the audience is familiar with Hayward, Wisconsin, Sawyer County, Wisconsin, fishing is a major part of life there. And the National Freshwater Fishing Museum in Hayward, Wisconsin is there. My grandfather and my great uncle, my grandmother's brother who helped build the cabin back in the 1930s, early 40s, they actually helped fund the building of the National Freshwater Fishing Museum. And the reason I bring that up is because within the National Freshwater Fishing Museum, there are 2 statues that are labeled the Primitive Fishermen. And you might think that would be a nod to the local Indigenous Ojibwe. The band of Ojibwe up there is the Lakudere. And that's what you think it might be, something a little bit more primitive fishermen, you would think human fishermen. Well, they're Bigfoots. They are, without a question, statues of Bigfoots. They're hairy, they're huge. I do have photos, and I have photos of, I put together an experience map for the listeners and some other related photos pertaining to my experiences that I will actually post on the Patreon episode as soon as that's released. So people will get to see what those things look like. They are not fishermen, they are Sasquatch, without a doubt. So now, as it pertains to Bigfoot and my family's connection, one of the first stories that I remember hearing was about how my grandpa and my great uncle would try to scare the children by pretending to be bears. But what they did was they put black garbage bags over themselves and then got on the roof of the cabin and would stomp around. And a lot of these experiences that I'll be sharing, I never realized what it really could have been or been symbolizing until much later when I got really seriously interested in Bigfoot. But that just always, now today that strikes me as odd. That is Bigfoot activity. That is not what bears do. Bears do not crawl on people's roofs and stomp their feet around. So that is a little anecdotal thing. The second story that I remember hearing from, this was a story that my dad told me when we were kids, and my mom verified. They were staying at the cabin in August back in the 1980s. It was their anniversary. That's why we know it was August. Well, they ended up hearing what sounded like a woman being murdered in the woods. And they were terrified. And they didn't know what it was. They legitimately thought that there was a woman being murdered in the woods. And they said it was extremely loud, and it was getting closer and closer to the cabin. And so they're sitting there, late at night, trying to go to sleep, and they're just filled with terror over what they're hearing outside. So obviously nothing comes of it, thankfully, but they went and spoke to one of the local business owners who really was a family friend for generations. And he kind of laughed at them, and he told them, he asked them, haven't you ever heard a bobcat in heat? A lot of times people may misidentify Sasquatch screams with bobcats or mountain lions, things like that. But This was a bobcat in heat. This was in August. So bobcats, and I looked this up, so this is how I know this. Bobcats are in heat, 5 to 10 days at a time during mating season, which technically can occur year-round, but is usually from December to May, with the peak in January and February. And this was August. So was it possible that it was a bobcat in heat? Sure. But the listeners, we all know, anyone who's into this topic knows that is, a prime example of Bigfoot behavior, the screaming. So that was kind of the second anecdotal thing that happened with my father's generation and the generation before that I did not, obviously directly witness. Well, the first time that something strange happened that I remember personally, we had a yellow lab. His name was Sprite. And there was an incident where my parents had to rush him to the vet because something had happened to him. And I remember that he came back with a shaved neck, and I believe there was stitches, but there was also definitely a rash. No one really knows what happened to him, but I'm curious. This dog was pretty wild. He used to, even when we were back home, he used to like bring home full deer legs and possums and things like that. So he could fend for himself. He got messed up by something. There are bear in the area. There are supposedly bobcats in the area and other wildlife. But the story that we got was that he got into a porcupine. So if you see what happens to animals, dogs in particular, when they get into porcupines, they have the quills all in their face, and it's all over. He had nothing wrong with his face. It was his neck. And a little theory that I've just kind of come up, if this were possibly Bigfoot activity, if he had a rough encounter himself, was I wonder if a Bigfoot grabbed his collar and yanked on it so hard, like we've heard from countless encounter tales. You hear about dogs being pulled so hard from their chains that it leaves fur behind from their necks. And when I think back on it and remember what I saw of my dog, that's a little theory that I came up with, was that he was maybe picked up by the collar or swung around by the collar so rough that, it caused that rash on his neck, and, Sasquatch fingernails cut him up. I don't know, but that is definitely something strange.
So he would come back with full deer legs?
Yeah, back at home, I grew up in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin, and yeah, we lived on, we would move around a little bit, but we typically lived on like farm properties, and no Bigfoot encounters there that I'm aware of. But yeah, he was a wild dog. He always had a collar on, but we never chained him up. So he would roam around. But he would always come back. And there were times growing up where I remember walking out to get on the school bus, and there was a deer leg sitting on the front stoop. So yeah, he was an interesting dog for sure.
Do you know if Sprite was the one that got the deer legs, or did they just randomly show up?
They would, I suppose that's a fair question. They would randomly show up. We always assumed it was him.
So that's interesting. There's an interview I just did where a lady shares this really interesting interactions they would have on their property around Silverton, Oregon. And one of the things, well, they were having UFOs all over the place. But the other thing was that there would be deer legs showing up all over the place that were just, clean cut, not torn off. It was very, very strange, but that just jogged my memory because I just had that conversation. So yeah, that's, I don't know, that'd be an interesting thing to think about. Andrew, is, how did those deer legs get there in the first place? Who knows, but.
Yeah. That's a great point. I guess in all fairness, I haven't done much research about Manitowoc and Sheboygan counties, which were we lived in a small community right on the border between those two. So maybe that's some homework for me.
But yeah, feel free to continue with what happened next there.
So the next core memory that I have is that my brother Glenn and I, he's my younger brother, we were fishing on the pier down at the lake, and we were fighting. You know, we had 6 kids in our family. We were always fighting, always getting at each other, always picking on each other. And one time my parents were out of town, so my grandma was watching us at the cabin, and we were fighting, picking on each other, screaming at each other. And my grandma yells out, if I hear you boys fighting anymore, you're going to come up here and go to bed, and you're going to wait until your parents come home to come out, right? And so we stopped fighting, and all of a sudden we started hearing something coming through the woods. And at first we were like, what is that? Who's walking towards us? So the property immediately to the southwest of our cabin at the time was a small little cabin that was the same size as ours. And there was never anyone up there. I mean, we would go up during peak vacationing season. Memorial Day and Labor Day were the main times we would be up there. And there was no one up there. We've never seen anyone up there until a new property owner came and built a nice cabin on that property. But this was before all of that. So there was no one there. And at first we thought, oh my gosh, is that a bear? And it stopped. You know, we were talking about it. We were looking. We didn't see anything. But then we really started to hear heavier footfalls crashing through the trees, the brush, and it got progressively worse, where it sounded like full trees were being snapped in half. And we got really silent as it was approaching us. The cabin is situated on a small little bay right by that dam. And we got really quiet. And then something caused both of us to simultaneously drop our fishing poles, turn around. We got our butts up those stairs up toward the cabin, and we were in hysterics, crying, screaming. And, you know, we go barging into the cabin, and my grandma, of course, is immediately furious at us because, you know, we were fighting again. And we were like, no, we weren't fighting. We promise. And we told her what had happened. And, you know, she just kind of brushed it off and said, all right, well, you two calm down, you know, get your wits about yourselves and just, you're staying up here for now. It was getting dark. It was getting dark. This was right at twilight. And so that scared the crap out of us. And I've had conversations with my younger brother, Glenn, because as we'll see as we progress here, he seems to be a focal point. Every time I seem to have an experience, he's also around. So that was really the first really strange, you know, thing. And at the time, we didn't know what any of this was. We had no idea. We had no idea what it was. We still don't really know. But as we get into the subject, you know, a lot of this is aligning with what we're hearing, you know, Bigfoot encounters around the entire United States. So the next thing that I remember, our cabin has a screened-in porch, and it was nighttime. And I was watching 2 of my uncles fish on the pier, and all of a sudden there was a massive splash right by that dam. And they came bolting up those stairs just like my younger brother. And this was probably a year later. All of this really kind of taking place in the early to mid 1990s. But they came bolting up, and I remember them shouting, you know, what was that? What was that? And my other uncle said, I don't know, but it was big. And my other uncle then followed that up with, it was huge. And so, they came, I was standing right next to the door watching them fish. They came running up, barging in, just like my brother and I had done. And unfortunately, neither of them seemed to remember what it was they had seen. They don't remember the experience at all. But that is certainly one of those core memories, and so in doing some other research around and having conversations and reading stories around Sawyer County, Wisconsin, we've seen examples of that where something jumps in the water or is crashing through the water. And, if it was a bear, they would have said we ran upstairs to get away from that bear because the dam is pretty close. So, it's probably only 40, 50 yards away from the end of that pier. And, if it was a bear, if it was a bear, they would have said it was a bear. But they didn't say it was a bear. They had no clue what it was, but it was huge. So that was the next kind of experience that I remember as a child at the cabin. I think the next thing that I'll share is we have that property across the street that's, comes out where the dam spills out and it turns in, goes into the river. And there are times where it just goes silent. It goes silent. It gets very eerie. And I'm very close with all of my cousins. We had 30 or some cousins growing up where we would get together on Memorial and Labor Day weekend. And it was a huge family event. And a lot of my cousins who are, closer in age to myself, they definitely report that eerie feeling, the woods going silent. One time I was down there by myself and I got that eerie feeling. The woods went silent. And for whatever reason, my eyes kept drawing me up toward the south end of, it's kind of the hill. There used to be some trails that go through there. They're kind of grown over now. But there would be, we would walk down there. People would, to get down further down river. And I just remember being drawn to this log and looking at it and feeling really weirded out. Continuing fishing, turned my head again, and the log that I had been drawn to was gone. So that is something I've never been able to explain. Didn't see anything, didn't see limbs, didn't see, eyes. I didn't see anything, but I saw a shape that at the time I was probably 12, 13 years old, I thought was a log. And for whatever reason, I was feeling creeped out. And I just, when you have that sixth sense or a lot of times it feels like, when something's watching you, that feeling of being watched. That feeling of being watched and the overall eerie feeling, the silence in the woods kept drawing my eyes to that log. I tried to push it off. I look back, the log is gone. And that's actually something that I haven't, outside of the general eerie feeling, haven't really shared with even my brother or my cousins who we talk about Bigfoot with. So that to me started to make things, and with all the other things that had happened up to that point, started to really kind of turn being alone, fishing alone out there, whether we were on the pier or fishing down by the riverbank. I'm not really comfortable going down there alone anymore. I don't know what it was, but again, when you don't know anything about Bigfoot and then you do, you just have to wonder. So that was kind of the next thing that I experienced growing up. Another item with my brother Glenn. There was one time that my dad took just the two of us up there. It was March or April. So as you probably know, Jeremiah, and the winters go in northern Wisconsin can go basically up until, early May. So we were up there March or April, and the lake was still frozen over and there was snow on the ice. And we were there to do some repairs on the cabins before people were coming up for Memorial Day. And my brother and I remember looking out from the screened-in porch down at the lake, and we saw footprints that were coming out from the woods. And when I share the experience map that I put together, this will become a little bit more clear. But it came out of the woods to the north, and they crossed to the east toward the dam. And they did this weird circling thing, where it kind of looped around a couple times, and then went back out closer to the dam, out the other side to the north. There were no ice fishing holes drilled, and the thing that my brother Glenn actually reminded us, and not necessarily discussing things, in light of, coming on the podcast, Jeremiah, but these have been conversations for, several years where we were recounting these things. They looked like one single foot going around, walking around, coming out of the woods. It looked like 1 foot track. And again, when you examine the evidence of Bigfoot trackways, they walk 1 foot and the next foot falls directly in front of the other. And it did this strange looping motion, came out of the woods. Now, there is another cabin directly to the north nearby. However, they came from the woods. It didn't come from the neighboring property. It came from the woods a little bit to the west of that. And that'll kind of, on this map that I'll share, I'll have it noted with where that area was. So it circled around, went down toward the dam, circled around, and went back up more toward the east, right by the road that separates the road that goes over the dam. And then there, of course, the roads are plowed and the snow's packed. So we didn't notice, we didn't see where the footprints had led to. We were overly cautious kids, I would say, and didn't go out on, try to venture out on the ice and check them out any further. But, just hearing what you hear about Bigfoot and the tracks that they make, I just thought that was a potential opportunity there. So that was the next encounter with my brother. And then the next time was several years later. We were up there, my brother Glenn and I, and we were out on the boat fishing on Callahan Lake. Kind of went back into where there's a lot of bogs, and that's really where a lot of the prime fishing is. We were kind of back in between bogs toward the east end of the lake. And we were, everything was completely normal. And we were talking, we were having a great time. We were telling jokes, we were catching some fish and having a really good time. And then we were back in this little cove area. And again, the woods go silent. And again, we went silent, and we're both staring off in the same direction. And just like what had happened years ago, we simultaneously got freaked out. And we just looked at each other, and I said, "We need to get out of here." And he was like, "Yep." We started up the motor and we went back. We got off the lake. We went back in the cabin and stayed inside for the rest of the night. And that was another thing, just another one of those strange things, strange experiences that, we always kind of questioned growing up. And, there was one more experience that happened after that. Before there was the next experience that happened was there was another time my dad had taken us up there. We were meeting up with a friend of my dad's, and his son, and they had taken us out fishing. We stayed at a cabin at a resort on the Chippewa flowage, great fishing. And we were off school. I believe it would have been spring break, or there was some other reason it worked out to go up there and extend our trip. So we extended our trip, and my brother and I were a little bit older now, probably we're a year apart, so probably 14 and 15 years old. And I remember we were in the cabin. There's a nice old stereo there, and we were blaring our music. And I think we were playing cribbage or something like that. And all of a sudden we started hearing something outside the cabin. Even, we could hear it even over the music. We listened to loud nu metal at the time, right? So something caught our attention over that music, over our game of cribbage. And we turned the music off to get a better listen to it. And we were hearing this strange sound that it's hard to it almost sounded like the bleating of a goat, just kind of a mumbly, whiny, almost like a cry. I'm going to embarrass myself trying to replicate it, but it was kind of like a... And we had no clue what that was. It didn't sound like any of the wildlife that was, that is common up there. And this thing was getting closer and closer to the walls of the cabin, and we were getting freaked out. And it was toward the front of the cabin, and we could hear it moving along the outside wall of the cabin back toward the lake. And we heard scratching all along as it was going back to the back of our cabin. And it was making these weird noises the entire time. Very strange. We were so terrified. Anytime we would go up there, we would buy, firecrackers. That's just part of what we do up there. And we don't have guns up there. And we certainly didn't carry guns when we went up there. Never owned guns ourselves at the time. But we were so scared. We were trying to scare this thing away. So I opened up the window in the kitchen of the cabin, and I cut a hole in the screen, lit a fire, those black cats that are multiple shots, lit one of those off, chucked it toward the front corner of the cabin. They go off, and this thing runs away. And again, it was just one of those experiences where we're so terrified by what's going on, not knowing what it was, the strange vocalization, and we had no clue. It was freaking us out. My dad was out with his friend at the time, so we were there alone. And when he came back, he was so mad at us for cutting a hole in the screen, because especially in the summertime, there's mosquitoes, there's bugs and everything else. Squirrels could get in, all that fun stuff. And he said, if you ever hear or see anything outside the cabin, all you need to do is flip on the front light, and that will spook them away. So that was another experience that we really, we can't explain it. And especially back then, all these things are starting to build up, and, we never knew what it was, but my brother Glenn is he hunts. My cousins are also avid hunters. They hunt up there or would for years. And we know enough about bears, skunks, raccoons, things like that. This wasn't any of that. We both agree. And so, but we didn't know what it was. That really kind of were the earlier childhood experiences. And, growing up, we would watch things like, a lot of the listeners always go back to Leonard Nimoy and In Search Of. For us, it was unsolved mysteries and sightings, right? And so that's really where, we would see Bigfoot, a lot of, rehashing of the Patterson-Gimlin film and hearing things about that. We never connected any of these strange things that we had experienced growing up to possible Bigfoot activity. And so years had passed where, late high school, early on into my college years, Bigfoot, and shortly thereafter, in the years following, even graduating from college, Bigfoot started to become a little bit more of a cultural phenomenon. Finding Bigfoot was I think maybe just starting, and messing with Sasquatch. We loved the messing with Sasquatch commercials, and Jack Link's is actually headquartered in Monong, Wisconsin, which is in Washburn County, the county immediately to the west of Sawyer County. So, we're grown up. We like having a good time when we go up to the cabin. I, in particular, had really gotten into Bigfoot as a cultural phenomenon. And, so there was a time we went up there for my older brother. It was his very conservative bachelor party. And he had brought a couple friends. My younger brother had brought a couple friends, and I went up there, and we're up there. We're sitting around the campfire. This was even during the day. Just the sun hadn't even started to go down, but we start talking about Bigfoot, and I did a whoop, and that got a big laugh out of everyone. And one of my brother's friends started talking, and I would say 6 or 7 seconds at least, about 10 seconds had passed. And from the northeast, across the road, there's a swampy area. We got a return whoop. And everyone went silent. And I was like, did that just happen? And everyone was kind of incredulous about it, but we all got kind of quiet. And, we decided to go inside and figure out what we were going to do for the rest of the evening, go out on town and leave the area. The next day, so they had gotten up there a day or two before I had gotten up there for my brother's bachelor party. And the next day, my younger brother Glenn asked my older brother, did you tell Andy what happened the night before? And he said no, and they started kind of laughing, like a nervous laughter. And my older brother goes, "What was that?" That was all they could say. So I asked, well, what happened? So they had brought a boat up. They were out boating on the lake, and they saw a tubular light starting to follow them as they were just casually boating along the lake. And they had no idea what it was. I think they described it as maybe 2 to 3 feet long, tubular, ovular shaped. And it was essentially following along the boat. And the strangest thing about it was they said it didn't fly off. It didn't just disappear. It submarined underwater into the lake. And it wasn't until I was actually watching Missing 411 The Hunted, and they have Ron Moorhead, they do a reenactment of the orbs that Ron Moorhead had seen up there. And there was a scene, I freaked out. I was like, this is what they saw. And so I took a video of it on my phone, rewound it, took a video of it on my phone, sent it to my brother, Glenn, and I said, is this what you guys saw? And he said, that is exactly what we saw. So moving forward, Bigfoot was certainly a topic of conversation after that, if nothing else, because we knew more about Bigfoot behavior, not nearly as much as I do today, but had really I started to get more and more into it. We would make a joke out of it. When our family would get together, I would, get some laughs out of people doing howls, tree knocks. And there was one time where it was kind of a strange transition where we were talking about Bigfoot inside the cabin. My grandma was there. A lot of our cousins, we were all adults at the time. We're talking about it, just kind of goofing around, talking about Bigfoot. And which of course leads to beliefs about what is Bigfoot, things of that nature. And my grandma shared a story. My grandma kind of interrupted the conversation, but it kind of seemed to be a transition where she started talking about how her father, who had built the cabin, built the resort, had a friendship with the Lakota chief, John Frog. And she got into some stories there, and it just seemed interesting how she brought it up in the middle of a conversation about Bigfoot. So that kind of led me on a different path. I love that area up there. That place is Sawyer County, Wisconsin is absolutely beautiful. Going up to our cabin, you get that eerie feeling when you're alone and things like that. Anyone rarely was, but I started to get into kind of the Native American history of Sasquatch, trying to find out more about what the Lakota believed and taught, what their culture was, what their oral history was about Bigfoot, and really started, just getting into it on a personal interest level. I tried to do deep dives, but there's not a whole lot you can do when you live 500 miles away and you're trying to do research on a local band of Native Americans and their beliefs. There's what you can find on the internet. So I had tried to get into the history, the indigenous history of the land, and started getting into it a little bit more seriously, and kind of how Native American culture, how their beliefs in Bigfoot and all of that became part of it, right? Like became part of my interest in Bigfoot. That was kind of an angle that I was really interested in. In around 2022, 2023, I subscribed to another Bigfoot podcast, popular Bigfoot podcast, and was, starting to hear stories from Native Americans about their beliefs and the things that happened, not only, around the country, but I was really looking for, Wisconsin, and ended up hearing actually encounters from here in Nebraska. And I never believed that there was Bigfoot in Nebraska. It just doesn't, the one gripe about the difference between, the landscape of Nebraska and the north woods of Wisconsin is there's not a whole lot of forests, nearby, at least. Certainly not nearly as expansive as in Wisconsin. The majority of our lakes, probably 90% of them are man-made reservoirs. And so I just never really thought that Nebraska could be a prime location for Bigfoot, but there was one episode that I heard featuring Barry Webster and his brother Derek Webster from Rez Squatching Research on the Omaha Reservation, about an hour north of Omaha. And so, I'm much more seriously into Bigfoot. I've attributed, all of these strange encounters that I've shared up to this point as, at the very least, potential Bigfoot activity. There's an element to in doing the research on and hearing encounters from Native Americans and First Nations people in Canada and of course all around the world, but there is a level of spirituality that's involved, what is commonly dismissed as the woo factor. And I was getting to a point in my life where, I needed to take a break, sort some things out. And so I had heard about an encounter in Wisconsin in the forums of this Bigfoot podcast from another area in Sawyer County, Wisconsin, that I was actually familiar with. I'm not going to name the property, but what I will share with the audience is that it is I'll just say it's the BFRO report from Sawyer County, Wisconsin in September of 2022. That's when it was reported. I believe the encounter happened in May of 2022, and it was reported in September. So I needed to take a break from work. I needed to, just decompress, and I wanted to take a trip by myself. Well, as it turns out, I had to take my dog. We have a 4-year-old Siberian Husky, and so my wife didn't want to deal with him and his ball of energy and his neediness while I was gone. So I had to take the dog with me. So I wanted to go up there, and because of what I had read about this encounter, I stayed at the location where this encounter took place, a Class B experience, Class B report. Had my dog with me, so didn't necessarily get out in the woods as much as I would like, but I did get out, and there were some strange things and some environments that are so closely associated with Bigfoot activity. First thing I noticed when I arrived at this property was there is a very large power line clearing that basically cuts across the drive down to the cabins. This is a resort that is on a lake. And so that's the first thing that I noticed. So snap a picture of that, got there, got settled in. I went and had dinner on site, and I had met the owners of the property, and very nice people. And I waited until everyone had cleared out, and I said, I'd like to share with you why I'm here. And she was like, oh yeah, why is that? Having conversations with all the locals, about, my life story and growing up there. Didn't get into any of the Bigfoot stuff with strangers from up there. But after most of the people had left, I said, I'm interested in telling you why I'm here. And she said, oh, why is that? And I said, well, are you aware that this property is the last reported Bigfoot encounter in Sawyer County? And she kind of slaps her hand down on the table. She goes, I did not know that. You should tell my husband. He's really into Bigfoot too. And just the other day, he was talking with a friend who owns I believe the friend owned a local tavern, and they were on another lake, and people came and reported that they were out fishing on the lake and had boulders thrown at them from the wood line. I say, yeah, that's if you believe that, and if you know about these things, you know that is something that happens, and it happens a lot, specifically with people who are fishing out on the water. So I was staying there, I believe, for 4 or 5 days. I went out. I went all around that lake and the surrounding lakes, and this is back country, right? There are some resorts. This was June, and one of the things that I found kind of surprising was there weren't a whole lot of people there. I didn't see anyone out on the lake while I was there on boats or anything like that. I went to other lakes in the area. I didn't see anything. There are some cabins. I was up there for 4 or 5 days, and there was only one time I saw someone just kind of out and about on the drive, past a couple trucks, driving away or driving past me on the road. And the only other person that I saw up there at the time was an elderly woman who was taking a walk. That was it. So the reason I bring that up is because I found 2 things that I find extremely interesting that I took photos of. And actually, I had reached out to the person who had submitted that BFRO report. We had some conversations and showed him some of these photos, and he was certainly of the mindset that this was potential Bigfoot evidence or sign. And I have these photos, and I'll share them with the members on Patreon. But I was driving. I parked along the road in an area that kind of it was near a clearing that kind of went back into the swampy area. A lot of the pictures I took were from going back into these swampy areas and looking for footprints and things like that. And I came across, there's a huge boulder, and it's just off to it's just kind of sitting there in the middle of the woods. And there is a trail that in the photo goes, it's to the right of this huge boulder. And on top of this boulder, this boulder is probably 4 or 5 feet tall. And it was really what really interested me about it, what drew my attention to it in the first place was there's not like mountains. When you hear about big boulders like that, you're thinking, mountainous terrain or things like that. But there's just this huge out of place boulder. Well, sitting on top of this boulder was a football shaped rock that was probably slightly bigger than a football. And that was really strange. And, you hear about Sasquatch stacking rocks. But there's also this trail right here, and I'm thinking, well, that would be potentially a prime spot next to a game trail for, the Bigfoot to hide behind this rock and use this smaller rock that's sitting on top of this boulder to potentially hunt for deer and other wildlife that's there. And the weird thing about this rock is it was very clearly picked up and moved and put there intentionally. The bottom half of it was wet and kind of muddy. And I thought that was so out of place next to this game trail on top of this random boulder in the middle of woodlands. I just found it very intriguing. Took a photo of it, which I will share. And then the next item that I saw was I was traveling a little bit further down. A lot of the areas I went to kind of encircled an area around this lake and some of the smaller surrounding lakes where this BFRO encounter took place. And I'm hearing these other stories right in that area. So I'm going all over the place trying to find the general areas where these stories are being told. And I got a little bit further down. It was kind of along a stretch where there were no houses, no nothing. And there again was another out of place boulder, this one directly on the side of the road. And about 8 feet up, so this boulder was right next to a tree, and about 8 feet up, there was a branch that had very clearly been broken. So I get out, I take a look, it looked like I'm thinking it's a snap, right? I'm thinking, oh, maybe a Bigfoot snapped this branch. So I'm walking around, I'm looking for signs of damage to other, branches. Could have been, a larger falling limb had hit it, broke it, snapped it. But it wasn't just, it was, and people can see and judge for themselves, but it certainly looks to me like it was twisted and snapped and not just snapped. There's no rough edges. It certainly appears to be a twist from other photos I've seen of, suspected twists. So I took a photo of that. I'll share some other photos of, the general landscape of the area. Very swampy, very marshy, some prairies. It's beautiful up there, and it's part of what draws me back, and part of why I went up there to see if I could find some evidence of Bigfoot from this BFRO report. Something strange happened the second to last night I was there. My dog was potty trained. My dog's potty trained. Ever since we had him, we got him. He was a pandemic puppy. Ever since we got him, he's never had a single incident in the house unless he was extremely sick. He doesn't even go number 2 on our walks. He waits until I let him out in our backyard. Very strange, but that's his MO. That's his behavior. Never just goes to the bathroom in the house. The second to last night I was up there, and the other thing I'll say is, and my wife will certainly attest to this, when he wants to go out, he will let you know. It doesn't matter if it's 9 a.m. or 2 a.m., he will let you know. Well, I woke up in the middle of the night to the cabin I was staying in had all laminate floors, maybe some tile. I woke up to him. He was sleeping out on the couch in the living room area of this cabin. And I woke up to him jumping off of that couch, which was along the wall, the outside wall of this cabin. I don't know what led up to it. I heard him jump off the couch. His nails were just slipping and sliding on this wood floor. And he runs into the bedroom that I was sleeping in and just proceeds to just pee all over the place. And, I'm livid. Why didn't you wake me up? I would have let you out. I'm cleaning it up. And I am trying to, he's hovering near me. And I'm trying to get this cleaned up. He's hovering near me. I'm trying to, I took a break or two from cleaning up the mess, walked him to the door, tried to get him to go outside. He was pulling back. He did not want to go outside. And then I realized that he was shaking. And I'm mad, he's never done this before. We're staying in a rental cabin. I'm looking on the walls to see if he had gotten on the walls or any of the furniture. And it was just the strangest thing. He was spooked by something so bad he couldn't control himself and didn't even attempt to wake me up because he did not want to go outside. And he's seen wildlife. We'll go on drives, and especially, during this trip, we would go on drives and we would see deer. And he would just look at the deer. He would get real interested. And we saw at the time there were turtles that were laying their eggs. They were crawling up out of the water and laying their eggs. He was real interested in that. He doesn't get spooked by things. So something spooked him at this location where, there's Bigfoot activity. I'm finding potential Bigfoot sign in the immediate vicinity. And again, nothing conclusive, very strange. And he did not want to go outside. He was freaked out. And, again, do I know? No. But if you pay attention to the stories that people tell about dogs and Bigfoot in particular, like we were kind of talking about before, they don't necessarily get along. And dogs will hide under porches. They'll shake. They'll crawl between your legs. And my dog was doing exactly that. He had never done it before. He has never done it since. And I just had to put it in the back of my mind, really take it out of the back of my mind, and can't help but wonder if that was part of it. So that was that encounter. I came back from that trip. That was when I had joined the Bigfoot Society. And that was about then, shortly, I believe it was in June or July of 2023 that we spoke first, Jeremiah, on that chat, the member chat. And about a month later, again, and after all this, I'm sharing these pictures with people, and I'm telling them, like, compare this photo to this, photo that someone posted about a apparent Bigfoot evidence or whatever, and I think it's pretty convincing. So I'm in full-fledged Bigfoot mode, and I get back to, I'm thinking about the area. I'm thinking about Sawyer County, Wisconsin. I'm thinking about its history. I'm thinking about my family's history, and I'm thinking about the Native American experiences there. And I try reaching out to local Sawyer County experts, if you will, and tried reaching out to the LCO, Le Coudray band, tried reaching out to that community, never got a response from anyone. And I'm thinking, man, I remember hearing about this Rez Squatching Research from that episode of the other podcast and Barry Webster. And so I reached out to Barry Webster. And he's a very intense but wonderfully spiritual person. And where I was at with my head, I had just gotten back from this trip to clear my mind, de-stress and all this other stuff, and really start thinking about spiritual things for myself and where I'm at in life. And it was a stressful time in my life. And, I shared with Barry my interest in Sasquatch. I shared with Barry my the quote unquote spiritual journey that I was trying to really get on track, and in my general interest in Native American culture. So Barry was very welcoming of me. Barry, if you ever hear this, thank you so much for even just having the conversations, because it's very hard to get someone who's very busy with the activity and the advocacy surrounding their community, their the reservation and things that are going on in the reservation. Barry is very involved there, and I think so highly of him. So in our conversations, Barry ended up inviting me to a campfire storytelling event that they were having on the reservation. And so I went there, and we're listening to Barry tell his stories, and it's they're if you are not familiar with the Missouri River, the stretch of the Missouri River from really, southern South Dakota all the way down into Missouri, there are bluffs, and there's Loess Hills, which were, essentially, they're not mountains, but they're pretty big bluffs, and they were formed by ancient winds blowing the sediment and silt, back and forth across the landscape there, the river there. And there's apparently some cave structures all along the area. It is much more heavily wooded than even if you go only a few miles to the east or to the west. And so, we are at this campfire event right along the river. And it was weird. It was, Barry's telling his experience, and he's teaching people, his people's beliefs and the stories that they have here. I'm not going to, I put together an experience map of near my Sawyer County out of respect for Barry and the tribal traditions there. I'm not going to do that for the Omaha Reservation area that we were in, or speak too much more about some of the other things out of confidence and assurances to Barry. But we're right along the river, and Barry's telling his stories, and to the west, towards a set of bluffs, wooded bluffs, we heard what I have heard numerous times to be a Bigfoot howl. And this was at night. The event didn't start until 9 p.m. This was probably closer to 10:30, 11 o'clock when we hear this howl. We hear this howl off to the west in the wooded bluffs during a break in Barry's storytelling. And obviously it caught everyone's attention. And, Barry said, there he is. So that was my first time. I heard a whoop. Now clear as day whoop, all those years ago. And now I'm hearing my first howl. And immediately after the howl, across the river into Iowa, there is a wildlife management area nearby. The coyotes just start going off like crazy. And it's like the typical, like you almost don't want to believe it, because it's like this is what everyone, these are things that everyone says happens in Bigfoot encounters, where there's at least coyotes nearby, in the environment and the wildlife areas there. So that was really cool. So after the event, I was helping clean up. And again, I'm so appreciative of Barry. And again, I respect him so much. He invited me to go out with him and another member of Rez Squatching Research into the woods, along the roads, to the hot spots. And it's 11 o'clock at night. I live an hour away. I text my wife like, hey, I'm not going to be home for a while, because Barry wanted to take me out and try to get me an experience. And, wife was cool with it. So I go out with Barry, and we stop at a few hot spots. Not a whole lot of activity. They're telling me what to look for. If Barry's approach is a spiritual one, and also a traditional Omaha Nation approach. He combines the two with his faith and with their culture. So, Barry's telling me, what to look for. He's out there. He is speaking in his native language. And because they do believe, and he shared this isn't like a secret or anything. He believes, and you hear it from other Indigenous peoples, but he believes that they can understand, that they've grown up around the people in the area, and won't tell any of those stories because they're not necessarily mine to tell. And I've already probably given a lot of secondhand and hypothetical potential Bigfoot encounters here. But the last spot we went to, the first few spots we went to, nothing. The last spot we went to was very interesting. The one thing that Barry has shared, and this is in the documentary, which Jeremiah, we've talked about. You had RPG on one episode, and he was, getting into it. And what I did not know at any point before really was RPG when he's talking about his experience there filming the Sitanga documentary. was he mentioned like a disco in the woods, how it would light up. And one of the things that Barry has said of a specific Bigfoot that is referred to in the Sitonga documentary as Stevie Wonder. If you want to know why they call him Stevie Wonder, go on Facebook, check out Rez Squatching Research, watch the Sitonga documentary. You get to see Barry reenact why they call this Sasquatch Stevie Wonder, and you can maybe put two and two together if you're old enough to know who Stevie Wonder is and appreciate his music. Anyway, one of the things Barry said about this Stevie Wonder is that he would have these blue lights that looked like LED Christmas lights. Blue LEDs, those little 1-inch thin LED Christmas lights. He had them in his fur, in his hair. And that's really weird, right? Like, you don't think it's like, oh, that's interesting, right? You kind of scratch your head thinking why a Sasquatch would have lights in his hair like that. But then you hear RPG talking about how the whole woods lit up like this. So maybe as these creatures are walking through the woods, the lights are attaching to them. I don't know. But we get to the last spot and we get out of the truck and it's pitch black. It is, there is no light pollution. You can't see a thing. We took a 100% not technological approach. I had brought a headlamp. I opted not to use it. I did not take my cell phone out of the car. I wanted to be very respectful of the process that Barry has and that the research group has. So we get out of the truck. It's pitch black. I can't see where anyone is, other than I know the three of us are standing directly in front of the truck. And we, within a minute, hear a very sharp whistle. And again, when you hear whistles that are reported in other people's accounts of Bigfoot activity, this was that whistle. It was very loud, very shrill. And it was just a single whistle. So that kind of perked us up. It is, I wouldn't even say it was quiet. We could hear, crickets and things like that. It didn't get that eerie, dead silent. But we started, we're standing there in the dark and in the silence, and we start hearing absolutely positively heavy bipedal footsteps to both to the left of us and to the right of us. And directly in front of us, there's like a small clearing, and probably 20 to 30 yards of a slight clearing. We're not hearing anything in front of us. We're hearing these heavy footsteps to the left and to the right. And this is going to sound crazy, I know. All of a sudden, these small blue lights start going off around us, all around us. Both sides, right about where we, in the direct area, probably 20 to 30 yards off to both sides. And they were not fireflies. We were seeing fireflies out during the campfire. Fireflies have a greenish, yellowish, whitish glow. These things were blue. And they were not blinking. They did not go off and go on. They appeared to collectively shift from, our 3 o'clock, maybe 3 to 4 o'clock is where I noticed them starting to light up, to our 3 and 4 o'clock, and to our 8 and 9 o'clock. And they started moving forward in an organized manner. Small blue lights moving in a coordinated way around us, out to the front of us. And then they just kind of dissipated. And I will tell you, when you're talking spirituality and you're talking about weird things, when you're talking about light rods and you're talking about orbs and you're talking about the woo, well, that's part of the experience that Indigenous peoples have been having for 500 years before we came here. They've told us their experience. They've told us that these things happen. I witnessed it for myself. Others have witnessed it for themselves because they were welcome to take part in an effort to witness these creatures and this activity that surround them. So, is it woo-woo? Yes. But I think that anyone, and this is not a new conversation, but I definitely believe you have to believe people. At this point, no one's putting themselves out there telling crazy stories for no reason. And these things all line up. At what point is the general Bigfoot enthusiast, the scientific researchers, at what point will there be an effort to understand instead of dismiss? It's something that I think has to happen in order to move the study of this subject forward. People who believe the woo are also interested in the science. I really wish that there was a collaborative effort to do both. And the only ones that I'm aware of that are really doing that, who embrace both sides, if you will, a comprehensive aspect of Bigfoot, are the Indigenous peoples and the Native Americans. And so I wanted to share that I had that experience, and I believe in this shared experience of these indigenous. As we get closer to disclosures of other types that are like in the news every day and all the craziness that's happening in the world around us, UAP, NHI, where disclosure really seems like it's knocking on the door, I do think that Bigfoot is next. And from there, maybe Dogman and the Van Meter visitor and all of the other crazy things that people have seen and witnessed and swear by over the course of history. I think some of this is going to start coming to light. And I think just like with whistleblowers today who are coming out and sharing their experiences dealing with UFOs, UAPs, non-human intelligence, this is being taken seriously now by members of our government. It's being investigated. It's slowly happening. I don't know what version of the truth or to the degree of total disclosure we'll get, but we wouldn't be getting there without people sharing their experiences in that community and being believed, and for those things to be taken seriously and studied. That's finally happening now with non-human intelligence. Think about what that means. And now if there is a community of Sasquatch enthusiasts who will listen to the stories of the people who have been telling us the same thing for centuries, maybe we can make some progress. I love the scientific aspect of it. I love seeing photos of footprints and hair and tree breaks and but no one's gotten anywhere with it. And maybe the reason we haven't gotten anywhere with it is because we haven't accepted the full potential reality of what these things are. And even though that's being shared with us by the people who've been around these creatures the longest. So that's my soapbox. That's the experience I had with Rez Squatching Research. Shout out to all those guys. Really respect them. And I think just to wrap things up, Jeremiah, I wanted to go back to my family cabin and Callahan, Mud Lakes, in Sawyer County, because right now, the dam that my family's properties basically surrounds, or is on both sides of where the dam goes for the lake to the river, it's in really poor condition. There is an effort to repair the dam, rebuild the dam, put a new dam in to maintain the integrity of the lakes that are formed. If they cannot get that done through the county by forming a lake district, etc., that dam is literally, it's at risk of literally being torn out, which would completely change the environment and the habitat and the wildlife in that area. And I think we all know what happens when you mess with when humans mess with Sasquatch habitat. Things can go south very quickly. And I don't want that for any of the people up there, and I don't know that would happen. But I believe these creatures are in Sawyer County, Wisconsin. I believe I've experienced things that have led me to believe that they're in the area of my family's immediate vacation property. And so, I think we need for the people of Sawyer County, Callahan, Mud Lake Protection Group, please continue to take care of the environment. Take care of don't destroy Sasquatch environment. It won't end well. Please believe the people who have generations, hundreds of years, even a couple hundred years before Europeans even came to this continent. This was part of their belief system, their culture. Believe them. I truly believe that we can move this thing forward and discover a lot more about these creatures than we ever have if we just try to engage and believe. There's a difference between hoaxing and the woo. I think some of the people who, even the general Bigfoot community really enjoys the most. Ron Moorhead is a great example. He is well respected in the community, if you ask me. And he has had encounters. He's recorded the Sierra sounds. He's provided some of the best evidence. Well, guess what? He's also sharing the woo. And I think if we tapped into it, we might be able to advance the study of these creatures. And protect the environment, believe, just believe, and we can move this thing forward.
Andrew, what a group of fascinating accounts. There's a few really important things that I think listeners can take away from the journey that you've been on. Maybe I took away myself, and I'm just going to point them out, is the way that you started to embrace the pursuit of the knowledge of the Native Americans that were in the area. And it wasn't just, okay, let me get this knowledge, but it's also a thing where you're doing it with respect and you're making sure that you're following, the way that things are done on the Omaha Reservation. with Barry Webster. And I think that is exactly what people need to do in the situation such as that. So, hats off to you. You are definitely on the right track, and it'll be interesting, to see where that leads to, because once you start going down roads like that, it usually, just doesn't stop. It can keep going into other things. Do you have any more plans of what this might turn into in the future?
Well, as you know, Jeremiah, the Midwest gets really cold. So
Yeah.
I'm not going out anytime soon.
Yeah.
We're in the throes of winter right now, but I'm hoping to get back out to reconnect with Barry or any other groups. And I hope I do want to say I hope I didn't offend Barry by sharing my experience. I think I do believe it's important for someone like me to share my experience when, like you said, when you embrace the culture and the respect and the spirituality. I hope, again, if Barry hears this, shout out to Barry, and I hope I didn't offend you by sharing that, some of the highlights from that night. But I would like to get back out maybe a couple times, may make a trip back up to Sawyer County, Wisconsin to trek around in the woods, and am planning actually on going to the Nebraska Bigfoot conference in Columbus, Nebraska, or Grand Island, and looking forward to that. That's in April. So yes, really looking forward. After that was really the last thing, because you have to take some time to process what you just experienced and put it all together, put your experience together, and form where you go from here. Like you were saying, what rabbit holes do you fall down trying to help the community uncover more truths about these creatures? So looking forward to get back out, and definitely looking to become more engaged with the Bigfoot Society Patreon group. I've been listening ever since we spoke, and before. I just haven't really gone into sharing my experience there, and haven't really engaged a whole lot, but looking to change that and get more involved, because if you're going to go out there and share a story and tell people to believe you, you have to have conversations as well. So I'm looking forward to that.
Absolutely.
And again, I will share when the episode is posted. I will post or work with you on getting the photos that I have that I referenced into the chat for people to see and comment on, and who knows, maybe all these things are just figments of my imagination, but you could say that of everyone's encounters, and I think it's just good to have. And you know what else? It's fun. It's good to have dialogue, and it's fun to have conversations. That's what really draws me into the Bigfoot Society and this topic today in general. It's fun, but I think there's an importance to it that not everyone quite understands how important and crazy this whole subject is. So, yeah.
Good stuff. I'm so glad that we were able to have this conversation, the first half of it again on a recorded venue like we did tonight. But I'm also glad you brought up the Nebraska Bigfoot Conference, and a lot of listeners might not know that there is a solid Bigfoot conference that takes place in Grand Island, Nebraska. It's April 25th through 26th of this year. I will be there in attendance. I'll be a vendor. So it's one of the right now 3 planned events that I'm going to be at. So, and we'll see. There might be other ones that come up, but right now there's 3 planned. So definitely check that out. From what I was talking to Steve Berg just a few months ago, and he said last year there were about a little over 800 people in attendance. So it's getting to be a very big deal. So if you're wanting to meet other Bigfooters in the Midwest, and also people travel to this one from all over the place, I would recommend traveling out to Grand Island. It's a few-day event, and it's a good one. But Andrew, I do want to ask you before we go, Is it a thing where, let's say there's someone listening and they're like, oh man, I know of some crazy stuff in that area up in Wisconsin. Is there a way people can reach out to you, or are you a gentleman that kind of maybe hang out in the shadows a little bit?
Well, that's certainly what that's certainly what I have been.
Yeah.
Maybe what I'll do, Jeremiah, is I absolutely, because I did mention reaching out and not having a whole lot of luck connecting with people in that area. I will provide my personal email address in the comments of the episode as well.
Okay. Very cool. Cool.
And you're free to share it from there, and maybe even pass it on to some of the other experts and researchers that you're in contact with who may know a little bit more about northern Wisconsin, Sawyer County, Washburn, Price, etc. That would be phenomenal.
Absolutely. Well, Andrew, thank you for coming on the show and for sharing all of the interesting experiences that you had over the years up there in Wisconsin, and then the just very interesting things that happened out there on the Omaha Reservation with the Rez
Squatching Research. Rez Squatching Research. Check them out on Facebook.
With the Rez Squatching Research, guys. Absolutely. Thank you again for coming on, Andrew.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. Number 1, encounters from Franklin County, Texas. Number 2, encounters from the entire state of Iowa. Number 3, encounters from Oak Ridge, Oregon, or the surrounding area. Number 4, any individuals that know about Bigfoot being flown off after the Mount St. Helens eruption. Number 5, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter while in the military. Number 6, those that have had a Bigfoot encounter in the southern New Hampshire or north central Massachusetts area, including Franklin County, Massachusetts. Number 7, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter in a Bible camp or Boy Scout camp setting. Number 8, individuals that have had Bigfoot try to enter their house forcibly while they were living inside. Number 9, individuals that have actively have a Bigfoot living on their property. And lastly, any sightings that are in the Ouachita National Forest area of Oklahoma or Arkansas. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one. If you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.